Welcome, everybody, to the Music Production Podcast. This is Brian Funk. I'm your host. I make music as AfroDJMac, and today I'm talking with Eshan Khadaroo. How are you today, Eshan?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
I'm doing well. It's really nice to finally get a chance to talk. We've been kind of bouncing things off each other for a while, and I really enjoy your work. You're doing this. I guess we can call it the name you're going under, Push4life.
Yeah, that's
Which
right.
is a great service to anyone trying to learn finger drumming and kind of programming MIDI drum beats and getting better at that kind of stuff. And what's nice about you is you come from the perspective of a actual real drummer.
Yeah, that's right. I was a session drummer for, let me see, probably maybe 20 years or something like that.
Yeah,
maybe 25.
very nice. Yeah, and you've also got your new podcast.
That's right. I just
Music,
started
Sounds,
a
and
podcast
Silence.
that I released at the end of January 2018.
Yeah, and I've enjoyed it so far. And you do have your kind of what got me here intro episodes, so I would direct people to listen to that because it is a really nice story that I think a lot of people can relate to. But maybe you can
Thanks.
give us kind of the short version of
The Cliff Note version.
yeah, and then people, I definitely recommend to everybody check out this podcast, Music, Sounds, and Silence, because I mean there are so few podcasts that really are about this kind of stuff, and you've got a nice angle. You tell your story, and you're into a lot of the philosophical stuff.
Yeah,
and
that's
the
right.
pursuit of creating good art. So yeah, if I can let you give the
Yeah,
people.
sure. Well, I started off playing piano when I was about 8 in Northern Ireland, where I grew up. And then I moved to Germany when I was 10, which meant I had to stop learning the piano. And when I was 12, I was able to speak German enough that I could learn an instrument again. And by that time, I wanted to learn the drums. So that's how I got into drumming. And I had a couple of really great drum teachers who really inspired me to become a musician. And when I was 18, I moved to London. My sister was living in London at the time. And I studied at just a small private school called Drum Tech. And I did a year intensive course. And from then onwards, I guess that's when my pro career started. I guess you could say it was semi-pro to start off with. I mean, as people who become pro musicians know, until you can actually make a living as a musician takes a very, very long time and a lot of dedication. But so when I was in my early 20s, that's when I started touring and doing studio sessions. And I kind of worked my way up the music scene in London for a good 7 years. And I was touring with bands like Urban Species. I played with Imogen Heap on her first debut album. What else did I do? I played with a band called Incognito. And then when I was mid-20s, I moved to Los Angeles. And I basically wanted to sort of try my luck there because I felt like I'd kind of done everything I wanted to do in London. And I was still young enough to want to sort of see the world. And I toured America previously with a band, an 80s sort of punk rock band called Bow Wow Wow. And I did a 3-month tour with them in the States in 97. And that's when I realized I'd just love to live in the States because I grew up watching American movies and, so I knew the culture really, really well. And once I was there, I was like, I have to come here. So I think it was in early 2000, I moved to Los Angeles. And I was sort of working my way up the ladder there, so to speak. And then September 11th, 2001 happened, with the World Trade Centers. And I was kind of shocked by what happened. And it shocked me that much that I was like, I'm not too sure if I want to stay here right now. Because that's when George Bush came into power. And everything, as you know, I'm sure, it was kind of a weird time in the States. Because everything had been sort of cool. And then all of a sudden, everything was different. And there was a lot of anxiety in the air. So also, I'm my dad's from India. So I'm half Indian, half Irish, but I have a Muslim name. So I kind of felt uneasy being there, if you know what I mean. And I did feel like odd times where I felt like a sort of latent racism. So I was like, I don't feel comfortable here anymore. So anyway, at the end of 2001, I moved back to Europe, and I've been in Germany ever since. And I continued working as a session musician from Germany, but I would fly out to London and, go on tour with bands. And I did that up until 2007, I believe, when I joined Blue Man Group. They were opening a new show in Germany. And that's actually when I can really officially say I was a pro musician, because that's when I had enough gigs to actually just completely, not just live off of my work, but actually be able to save some money. So that's how long it took me to be a real pro.
Very nice.
And I did that for a couple of years. We were playing, anywhere from I think 5 to 8 shows a week in a theater. And when that show came to an end, that was, 2008. And then in 2009, I joined Cirque du Soleil. I joined their show, Kuza. And I went on the road with them for just under a year. And then I got chronically ill. I had kidney failure, which I just told you about before we started a little. And I kind of go into the details of what happened to me in my second episode of Music, Sounds, and Silence. I kind of wanted to get it out of the way. So if anyone wants to hear the specifics of that story, that's probably the best place to check that out. But that was sort of like a definite sort of turning point in my career, because when you have kidney failure, you need a specific treatment called dialysis, where you need to sort of get hooked up to a machine every other day, and the machine basically cleans your blood. So it takes over the work of your failed kidneys. But that means you're sort of stationary. You can't go anywhere because you always have to have these treatments every other day. And so what happened then was from one day to the next, I had to stop my session drumming career. And which wasn't too bad, because I was planning on doing that anyway after the Cirque du Soleil tour was supposed to be over. And I wanted to go into teaching anyway. So even though it was sort of terrible the way it happened, it was at least at the sort of point in my career where I was kind of planning to do that anyway. So when it did happen, that's when I sort of bought my home studio. I started off with a Native Instruments Machina that had just sort of been released somewhere around then. That was 2010. And that's when I kind of started getting into, I'd always been into Ableton. I got into Ableton around 2002, 2003, something like that. But that's when I really got into production and, creating music and that kind of thing. And to cut a long story short, basically in 2015, I think, when Ableton Push 2 came out, I bought that, and that changed everything for me. That's when I finally had the instrument that I really felt like home at. You know what I mean? I was like, just because I was so into Ableton, it was like the hardware version of Ableton, and I felt at home with it immediately. And also the grid layout, the way you can play melodies and chords with scales, that opened up so many new possibilities for me. Because even though I started off on piano, I was never a great pianist, and I can only play in a few different scales. But with the Push, it was like, wow, let me try this scale, experiment with things that I just couldn't do. And I kind of can play the way I do as a drummer, you know what I mean? Like rhythmically, with just 2 fingers, and it sounds really cool, which I couldn't do on a piano. So that's when I kind of came up with the whole Push4life thing, because I really, really fell in love with the instrument. And then a friend of mine in London also bought a Push around the same time, and she was having issues. She just couldn't get her head around the way it worked, because she wasn't really into Ableton or anything. So just the whole paradigm of how Ableton and Push worked was really new for her. So I ended up creating a video for her, but I sort of made it for everyone at the same time. Pardon me. And I put that, that's the, I can't even remember what it's called, the top 5 things every Ableton Push 2 beginner should know or something like that. I think it's called on YouTube. And that ended up becoming this sort of viral YouTube video. I think it has something like 130,000 views or something like that. And I know that that's sort of like one of the go-to videos for beginners with Ableton Push. And that's kind of what I think most people know me for, is that video. So yeah, that's kind of like the long Cliff Note version of how I got to here right now.
Nice. I've sent people to that video.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Oh, cool.
You know, I teach a couple of courses for Berkeley online. And while it's... I'm doing an actual Ableton Live course, but then there's also a sampling course, which uses Ableton Live, but it's a sampling course.
Right.
But a lot of times people, you know, they have all different kinds of controllers, and it's not focused necessarily on push, but if they have questions on it, I'm happy to go over that, because I'm like you. It's kind of as far as like a MIDI controller interface, it's my go-to as well. But I'll often send people there. It's like, you know, I get a couple videos that are pretty nice for people starting off.
Yeah.
So thank you for that.
Oh, well, thank you for sending people to it.
Yeah, of course. There hasn't been 130,000 people though.
All right. Okay, well then I take that back then.
It's been a few. Yeah, it's really cool. So it is, I always kind of find it interesting how our stories sort of seem like you never know where they're going until you kind of look back and like trace the steps back, and then it starts to make a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
So it's nice to see how your experience with touring and working with some pretty huge acts. I mean, the Blue Man Group that's amazing. That's
yeah, I was actually a huge fan before I ever joined. Same with Cirque du Soleil, actually. I love those companies.
Yeah, I always liked you know, I never saw a Blue Man Group show, but you know, I've seen it online and all that. And I'm always a fan of like unusual percussion. So that's like,
they actually make a lot of their own instruments as well, which is really cool.
Now let me ask you something. Is it and maybe this is something I'm not supposed to know. Is it always the same guys?
No. Well, I mean,
is it like a rotating
it actually
cast?
isn't. It's because there's multiple shows across the world.
Yeah.
So there has to be obviously more than the 3. And also, even just like if you think about it, I think there's probably 10 shows per week that were going on in the theater just that I was in. So, you know, 3 people couldn't do, like, as a drummer, it was extremely physical to do that show. But the Blue Man, what they had to do is really heavy physically,
right.
You know, in terms of, you know, because they go out into the crowd and, you know, they don't talk, so everything's over movement and percussion and body language. But yeah, so I think, you know, one Blue Man performer probably averages maybe like 4 or 5 shows per week, you know. So they have to have, I think, you know, per show, something like maybe 6 to 8 Blue Men, you know, who are also on call, because obviously if someone gets sick or someone gets injured, you know. And so the other, actually, the really cool thing about Blue Man Group, I always found as a performer, was because there's a rotating cast, there was also, you know, the show I was in, there were 4 drummers and 3 string instruments. And I think just for the drummers, there was also maybe like 7 or 8 drummers for the cast, you know, even though there were only 4 ever on stage. And then there was also maybe like 6 string instrument players. And then there was like 8 Blue Men. So I think there was almost never the same combination of people on stage in the entirety of the show. So that way, every show was unique because the lineup was ever changing. Because another thing as well is there are 3 Blue Men, but each Blue Man has a position in the show. So there's one's called left, the other center, and the other is right. And so it's basically like a role with, you know, everyone has, you know, obviously it's a performance, you know, it's like a theatrical performance, you know. So left has specific things to do at specific times in the show, and center and right. But, you know, someone who is left in the show might also learn center and might also learn right. So even if you have the same people, they'll be playing different positions, and everyone has their own style of playing, just like a musician has their own style of playing an instrument. So that way, every show was completely different, which was amazing, you know. So it was actually quite nerve-wracking as well, because the drummer in the show was like the conductor, and because every time the Blue Man had certain liberties to, you had to get from A to B to C all the way to Z, but kind of what they did in between each of those moments was kind of free, if you know what I mean. So they could have like they could improvise a little, which meant that the music in the show was never rigid. You always had to follow the Blue Man, because you would have to, as a drummer, you'd have to throw a certain cue when a Blue Man reached a certain point. So that means they might take maybe 2 seconds longer to get there. So you'd have to continue your part, and then you'd have to throw a cue at a different point each show. So that means, as a drummer, you're always connected to the Blue Man. You're almost like the fourth Blue Man, because you're connected to them. And the music is basically the emotion and the mind state of the Blue Man. That's what the music sort of expresses. Because if there was no music in the show, it would be a very boring show, because there's no sound other than the music, really.
Right. Wow, that's pretty cool. It's nice that there's that like kind of flexibility and a little bit of room for the individual expression and stuff. Yeah,
it's really, really cool. It was such an amazing show to be a part of.
Yeah, and it's quite a successful show too. I imagine you're playing in front of some pretty large crowds in those cases.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was in a theater, and I think there was 2,000 seats.
Okay.
So that was the max, but it was anywhere from half full to completely full. So 1,000 to 2,000 people per show.
Very cool.
And funnily enough, Cirque du Soleil just bought Blue Man Group, so now they're the same company.
Yeah, nice. Well, it's I guess a similar like idea in the kind of theatrical musical performance realm,
Yeah.
Yeah, I always I have the copy of the Love Beatles version they did with Cirque du Soleil. It's a lot of fun, like to hear the songs kind of remixed and remastered and reimagined, even rearranged.
Yeah. I think they got access to the original tracks, and
if I'm not mistaken, I think it was George Martin's son.
Who produced it?
I forget his first name right now, but I'm pretty sure he was involved with that. And
there is a documentary actually of how they put that show together, which I have seen, but it's been
I think I've seen that one too. Yeah. So
it's amazing what the amount of work that Cirque du Soleil put into a show is ridiculous.
Oh my God, yeah, and
because that's another huge difference between Cirque du Soleil and Blue Man Group is it's almost like a franchise system where they have multiple shows throughout the world, but it really is the same show. Mm-hmm. But Cirque du Soleil, they'll put together a show, like the show I was in was called Kuza, and that show only existed one time. And then they sort of send it out into the world. And it's actually its own company. Like it's a sub-company of Cirque du Soleil. So it goes out into the world, does its thing, and then Cirque du Soleil headquarters then start on a new show. Or they have multiple shows that they're sort of preparing at any one time. And I think, over the course of 25 or 30 years, they've put out probably that many shows, 25 or 30 shows.
Wow.
And they're all unique shows with unique costumes, unique music, unique performers. It's ridiculous. And they are one of the biggest entertainment companies in the world now.
Yeah, I mean, you see them all over the place, right? All different cities. And
I think they've got like 8 shows in Vegas alone, so different shows.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. So that must have been a great experience, and especially as a drummer, right? Tightening up your chops and working on something like that. Yeah,
and that was also again very similar to Blue Man Group, where because they're sort of acrobatic shows, a lot of times stuff won't happen as it's supposed to happen, and the music always has to follow what's going on stage. But in this case, there's a musical director who calls cues, and they actually were using Ableton, and it was an amazing feat. The musical director in that show was called Seth Stokowski, and he was a multi-instrumentalist. He would play piano, saxophone, guitar, and he was a virtuoso in each of the instruments. Right. And he would be running Ableton, and he had the entire show in scenes in Ableton, and he would be triggering the different scenes depending on what was happening in the show whilst he was playing the piano or the saxophone or the guitar, and it's extremely complex because it's always just a matter of seconds, and the changes could happen within the bar. So it wouldn't be like, okay, we're going to go to the end of the bar. It might be half a bar depending on what's happening, because you always have to be synced with the act.
Right.
So and there's extremely complex shows. It's like the music is just one tiny aspect of what's going on in the show.
Sounds like a lot of fun to be a part of.
Yeah. I mean, it's an amazing thing to be a part of. And like I also mentioned in my podcast, working with the acrobats was really cool, because as a musician, and you're always usually on tour with musicians or vocalists, and music is its own world. But when you go on tour and you have acrobats who are doing life or death things, so they really have to be prepared. Right. It's a whole different level, because I might practice, I might not practice. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. But if you're an acrobat and you're on a high wire, you better practice, because
you're not in shape. You're not loose.
Yeah. There's one act in the Cirque du Soleil show we had. It was called the Wheel of Death, and it literally is a wheel of death. It spins quite a few meters up in the air, and they're doing all kinds of somersaults and stuff on it, and it's extremely dangerous. So if you're not in shape for that one, you're going down.
Right. I'm sure their lifestyle on the road is a little bit different than the typical image of the rock star partying all night,
Yep.
Yeah. Probably a healthier part of the crew to hang out with, right?
Well, you would think so, but that actually isn't always the case. But
that's the road, right?
Yeah.
Nice. So you've had some pretty cool experiences too, just playing in bands, touring as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you miss that? Is that something you've or you kind of you've done that, you're settled? How do you feel in that way?
To be honest, I started when I was 18. That's when I really started you couldn't really call it touring as much as sort of just I was living in London at the time, and I'd fly out to do sort of one-off shows. And then, as the years progressed, I would start doing European tours, and then, the American tours. And then with Cirque du Soleil, that was sort of full on. And, with Blue Man Group, I would say within about a 2-year period, I played probably 200 shows, I'm thinking, something like that. And then with Cirque du Soleil, in the 10 months, I probably also played around 200 shows. Something like that. I can't remember. But it's great, but at the same time, it kind of really burns you out. When you sort of do little tours here and there as a musician, when I was starting out, it's always super exciting to go on the road, and you get your plane ticket bought for you, and you fly out, and you might get per diem, so you can go out to a restaurant and buy some food, and you meet different people from different cultures, and it's really, really cool. But you can only do that so many decades, you know what I mean? I did it for 2 decades, and like I said, as the Cirque du Soleil tour was coming to an end, I was planning on stopping touring anyway, because I was about 35 at the time, had been doing it almost 20 years, and I wanted to start a family, and I actually just wanted to be in one place and teach, and just do something completely different. So to be really, really honest, I don't miss being a session musician at all. I actually rarely even play the drums these days. I'm all about the push, and now that I'm getting into podcasting, I'm getting into that, and they're all new experiences that are really exciting to me, and I kind of feel like I have this sort of fresh fire. The other thing I've gotten into recently is modular synthesis, which is that's a complete parallel universe.
Yeah.
And that's where I feel like I felt when I was maybe 8 or 9, when I was playing with toys, what I mean?
Right.
And I can't really say that about being a session musician anymore. That was just work, and even though there were odd times where it really paid off, and I did a gig after I had my transplant, actually, with this Japanese band called the Boredoms, not the Boredoms. I always say the Boredoms. It's Boredoms, and they're this Japanese noise band. And they had 12 drummers for the show. They put together this specific show.
Wow. 12.
For and it was sort of built up in a circle, and then they had the main Boredoms band was sort of like central, and I think they had 2 guitarists and a bass player, and 12 drummers, and it was super, super intense. It was like a 1.5 hour show without a break. It went from one song into the next, and we got together I think 6 days before and had we learned the entire set there on at the location, and that was just completely mind-blowing experience. So there still are these moments, and I'm sure I'll still have some in the future, where I get a call for something that's just very special, you know what I mean? But at the end of the day, as a session musician, I always felt like you're like a glorified cover band musician, you know what I mean?
Right.
Because when you play in a cover band, you might play, say for instance you play in a Radiohead cover band, right? You're basically just playing stuff that other people have come up with. So you're like a craftsman. And if you're a session musician and for some reason Radiohead's drummer, has an accident and they call you, it's really kind of like if you were going to be playing in a cover band. You know what I mean? You're playing with the actual musicians and it's great, but your function is almost the same. You're copying what that drummer did.
Right.
And even though that can be a lot of fun and there might be room for your own personality, a lot of times there isn't. When you're a session musician, you get a call, they have very specific tracks, they have a very specific idea of what they want you to play. And in that moment, you're like a craftsman, you're not an artist.
Yeah, I understand.
And
your personality is not why you're there.
Exactly.
Your chops,
And
your
if
technique,
you're in the band for long enough, your personality will inevitably seep through, and you'll start doing stuff where they're like, "Oh, I actually like that, and can you do more of that?" And but a lot of times as a session musician, you'll get called in for a tour, and then you don't see the band for another 6 months, and then you get called in for another 2-week tour here, and you know what I mean? So it's so sporadic that there's never room to sort of do your thing. You always have to sort of, play it by the book. So yeah, I just personally don't find that exciting anymore. It's great to do, but once you've done it, there's so many other things you can do in music.
Yeah, very true.
Yeah.
On a much smaller scale, I kind of going through that a little bit myself.
Oh yeah?
Playing, I had a couple shows recently where we were doing some cover songs, and it was, really low-key, like happy hour type of deal. And, a couple at the school I teach at, I did a couple songs. So I was like learning, practicing those chops. And I try to do it my own way, I just, that's if I'm going to do it, at least like kind of my own way. But I know what you're saying, that like it's not your thing and it's not your like expression. So I kind of get tired on that real fast. Yeah,
exactly. And you can imagine especially if someone's giving you money to do it, they definitely have a very specific idea.
Oh, you have to listen.
What they want you to do.
Right.
Yeah. And you really can't sort of be like, I'm just going to do it how I want to today.
Right. It's like, no, there's another guy waiting.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I could understand that. So it's an interesting way to think about it, though. Like if you're like in, say, Radiohead, but you're the cover band.
Yeah.
guy.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's kind of happened to me.
You're
with
covering the drummer almost.
Yeah. When I played with Bow Wow Wow, who were this sort of tribal punk rock band from the 80s. I came in there and they wanted me to play exactly what the other drummer played.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, because we were on the road for 3 months, and I don't know, we played maybe something like 50 shows or something. So I kind of could give it my own flavor by the end of it. But, I basically learned the albums note for note before we went on the road,
Right.
So, which was a lot of fun as well. I mean, there's definitely something about doing that as well, because you learn so much. It's, by emulating other great musicians. Because if you think about it, if someone's gone into the studio and, paid a lot of money and they've spent hundreds of hours crafting these songs, there's a lot of thought has gone into it. And in order to replicate that the way that, whatever band wants you to do it, you have to sort of slip into that person's shoes. So you learn a lot about how they approached it. And so it's kind of like you suck that into you. And then, you know, when you keep doing that, you just keep getting better and better and better. And so there's definitely a lot to say for doing that, you know.
Sure. Yeah, and learning new songs, part of the reason I like to do it is to kind of expand my own palette. Because it's very easy to get like caught up in the same chord progressions, the same types of melodies.
You kind of reach a plateau a lot of times and can't get out of it.
Yeah, especially I pick up my guitar, which is my native instrument. And it's very easy to just be like, all right, this is what I always do. I always start here. And when you learn some new songs, you get different chord progressions. And that's the part I enjoy about it. But then when it becomes like, okay, now I have to do it again and again and again. It's like, I don't really want to do it anymore because time is so precious and it's so hard to find the time to make music. And and we were kind of talking a little bit about this, I think, before we started recording. A lot of being a musician these days is not just making music. It's making like we were both doing videos, and I had mentioned to you like the editing for me is like the part that that's my bottleneck, I guess, you know. And then there's maybe the promotion, the sharing, all that stuff that can be I don't really want to
it's kind of like high level juggling. You know, there's just so many things that you have to kind of be aware of, you know what I mean? And that in itself is very taxing, I find, because like if all I had to do was sit in my studio and just play around with my instruments and come up with cool melodies and beats and then sort of string them together and make an album, and that was it, I would literally be in heaven. But because, you have to, self-promote, you have to have websites, you have to have social media, and on and on and on. And as the internet grows exponentially, it's almost like your skill set will have to grow exponentially.
Yeah.
And I was actually reading this really interesting thing the other day about what was called context switching. So like if you just do one thing at a time and you're just within that one area, you get so much more done if you just sort of do one thing and then go on to the next. But as soon as you start multitasking, which is context switching, there's a lot of waste involved. That's how they kind of put it, where I think if you do two things at one time, there's 10% waste just in switching between the two projects, because your brain has to sort of reassemble the project in your mind. So there's so much energy that has to be expended. And it, like, say, for instance, you got 3 or 4 or 5 things. I think with 6 projects, there was something like 75% waste, because there's so much, just trying to keep track of all of the different things you're doing. And that's sort of like inevitable if you're a musician these days, or an artist or performer, and you're doing everything on your own. All you're doing is context switching. Like, you might be in the studio recording a track, and then you might want to share a story on Instagram of, I'm recording a track right now, and let me post it on Facebook, and it might be something really cool that I'm going to send out to my mailing list, and then by the time you get back to your track, you're like, oh, what was I doing? And let me get back into that. So you've expended so much energy, and if all you had to do was just do the music, you would be fine. But I think that's almost like one of the biggest challenges being an artist these days, is actually being able to create your art to the fullest potential, and not just sort of like 50% of what you really could do. You know what I mean? And I struggle with that every day, because I really have issues with this sort of context switching, because I also teach drums, every afternoon. So like I'll be doing stuff in the morning. At the moment, I've just been doing a lot of podcast stuff, and then I've been doing editing, and then in the afternoon I do drum teaching, and like I haven't literally touched my Push to compose in about 2 months now. So now when I go back to doing some music, I'm like, how does this work again? And even though I know I'll get back into it, it's just to get to that space again before I have to context switch again to do my podcast or teach. It's really challenging, and I'm sure a lot of people out there have the same issue.
Yeah, I do. And what you're saying about like trying to create 100% of what you're capable of, like,
Yeah.
I think that might be like the thing that keeps me coming back because I know I never do.
Yeah, I'm the
And
same.
there's like so much more left in the tank.
Yeah,
But,
and it's almost like you want to know what is 100% of what I can do.
I'd love to see that one day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I've definitely seen studies on that, and I think what this whole idea of context switching is really where like the assembly line was born out of, with like Henry Ford and making the Model T. Is he realized it's a lot better if I have one person just working on the wheels all day long. And we do we've done an activity anyway in the past in my classes where it's to show like the importance of like having one thing and focus. And we had like our students take like a construction paper and you slice it into like a long strip, and then you can staple it together so it makes a loop. So you take like one end and staple it to the other end, and it's a loop, and then you make another loop, and you're basically making a chain.
Okay.
And you have one group making the chain where each person does each step. So you cut, you make the thing, you staple it, you cut, you make, and you put it on. And then you have another group where one person's just cutting, one person just stapling.
Right.
And the group that's just one job per person, it's
killing it.
Like 3 times as as effective. And when you're like what you're saying, when you're doing your music, if you're like stopping here and you're like, oh, I gotta get this on, I gotta document this, I want to go here. And it's so hard just to get. I think everyone can relate to how hard it is just to get in the flow of like making a song or making a track. Like,
it's the hardest.
It sometimes doesn't even happen.
Yeah.
And each activity is like that. If you're lucky, if you get in that flow in 15 minutes, like every time you switch, that's 15 minutes gone.
Yep.
And, if you're anything like me with such limited time and every person in their 24-hour day, I think that is one of the big distinguishers of people that get things done and people that don't. And I don't think it's so much like talent all the time or ability. It's sometimes just like the process.
Yeah.
I like doing like kind of like a batching sort of thing where, okay, I'm only doing this now and I'm going to do a bunch of this and then I'm going to move on.
Yeah, yeah.
Over the last month in January, I did this January challenge where you have to make a little jam every day.
Oh yeah, how was that?
It's amazing. It's I'm gonna do a nice episode wrapping it up, and but I managed to do it every single day.
Yeah,
and it doesn't have to be good. That's probably the thing that got me to do it. Is it doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be perfect. The point is you're just doing it.
Yeah,
and it's one of the best things I've learned is that you can make almost anything good if you trust it. So much of my time, at least, is spent being critical over what I'm doing and not giving an idea a chance. But when I know that I've got to make a jam tonight, I got to put something together. So the first idea that comes along is like, all right, let's do it. And you just follow it. And
so it's more intuitive.
Yeah, it's just like, all right, that's what I came up with. That's what I'm going with. And it gets me in the zone a lot quicker. Instead of being in that place where like, I don't know, that chord progression, that's lame. It's in every song. Or, you get all these like kind of like voices in your head telling you why what you're doing is no good. But you're really being unfair to those ideas because they haven't had a chance to be developed yet. And
I think also a lot of time when you hear like finished albums, I know I do. I always imagine how amazing these artists are, and they probably just wake up in the morning and record their album and write it all in the same day and just get someone to mix it and then put it out. And which obviously doesn't happen, but I think that's this sort of like, especially before the internet was really what it is today, and you didn't see so much behind the scenes stuff, you know what I mean?
Right.
When someone came out with an album, you didn't know they were recording, and then all of a sudden it's there, and they're giving interviews, and they have all these amazing press shots, and it's just like, wow, these people are like superhuman beings. But I mean, at the end of the day, if you take any modern day artist, who's in the Billboard top 20 or something like that, if you saw the team of people behind them who are making that brand at the end of the day, because someone like Bruno Mars or Beyonce, they're brands. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And they've got a team of people who are making this illusion of that just being one person. But if you could see, you know, behind the curtain, you'll see like probably hundreds of people who are making it happen, you know, and make it like magic. But at the end of the day, there's so many people involved, you know.
Yeah, and that's not even to take away from their talents and their abilities. I mean, these are some of the top-notch people, top-notch artists to begin with, and they have
and then they have
behind all
top-notch
that.
teams,
Exactly,
and it's that makes them so superhuman, seemingly anyway.
Yeah, it's a lot of moving parts.
Yeah,
and you know, I guess it's a good point. You know, the kind of assembly line theory, like you can't have someone like that, say a vocal performer like that, or you know, just their stage performances are so incredible.
Yeah,
They can't be doing every single part of the process and keep that performance up to that level.
Yeah, absolutely.
Something has to give.
Yeah, it's funny like that you're saying the assembly line a lot of times, because the one thing that I'm really into, I've been into for maybe like a year or a year and a half, is this process called Scrum. Have you ever heard of it?
I don't think so. No.
It's like I guess it's sort of like this teamwork productivity thing, and I actually first heard of it when I watched a sort of like Ableton documentary that Ableton put out of how their teams work. I don't know if you remember that about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, they were like, this is the team that make Ableton or something. It's like a 15-minute video on YouTube where you kind of see them building stuff and having team meetings. And in that video, they mentioned that they use Scrum to, work on their products.
Mm-hmm.
And I know with the Push, I think, is it Jesse Terry, I think, is like sort of one of the leading people who helped to make the Push. If you look, it says product owner, and that's a Scrum terminology.
Okay.
And the Scrum thing is a whole process, which there's no way I will be able to explain right now. But it's like for people who are into productivity stuff, definitely check it out. I think the guy who helped invent it was called Jeff Sutherland, and he actually wrote a book which is more about this sort of philosophy more than a workbook on how to do it. I think it's called Do Twice as Much in Half the Time or something like that. And that book is amazing. Like he was like an Air Force pilot, and so he has sort of like a lot of military training about decision making and that kind of thing. And he took a lot of his inspiration. I'm sure you've heard of Agile, like Agile software development. Have you heard of that?
That's an acronym, right? Am I right?
Yeah, I think so. But Jeff Sutherland helped develop Agile, and then I think from that he ended up making this Scrum methodology. Sorry, and so it's basically made for teams, but and you work in these things called sprints, where you say a sprint's going to be either 1 to 4 weeks, and within that time you specify exactly what you want to get done. And by the end of the sprint, then you kind of reevaluate and you see if there was anything, any kind of impediments that are kind of slowing you down that you kind of remove. There's this whole process behind it. But I kind of made my own Scrum for one kind of thing where, because it's 4 teams, but like I do that. Like every week I have my weeks sort of built around sprints.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the beginning of the week, I kind of determine what it is I want to achieve. And sort of, it's not like a to-do list. It's very different. But like I said, anyone who's interested should check out that book, because it really is cool. Like I get so much done. Like especially when I'm making my courses where there's lots of moving parts. Like like there's video editing and the recording process and writing the scripts, and once it's all done, converting stuff and putting it online and promoting it and building web pages for it. There's so much to do that you can really get lost in the process. And if you're not efficient and you're doing everything on your own, there's no way you're going to get it done, on time at least, before the next version of the software comes out.
Right.
So, so that's something everyone should check out.
Twice as much in half the time. That's the title.
I think it's definitely Jeff Sutherland. That's the name of the guy who wrote it.
I'll put that in the show notes. I like that a lot. I'm so into that stuff.
Me
Productivity, efficiency, creativity.
Actually, the other thing, if you're into that, if you don't know of it, which is a piece of software that I use to do all of this stuff, excuse me, is a software called Workflowy. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
I put that in the show notes because it's actually free, so it doesn't even cost anything. And it was written by a Google, I think he was a Google employee who kind of went his own way, a programmer, and it's all it is an outliner. You know, like outliner software where you can indent stuff into, so you can create a list, and then you can indent certain parts of the list to be,
that's nice.
You know what I mean? And then, but the thing is, it's a huge list at the end of the day. And say, for instance, like you might have two main outline points, which is work and personal, right? And then if you click in work, now all of a sudden you're almost like within its own list.
Mm-hmm.
And then within work, I might have, like, say, for instance, Push4life courses, podcast, drum teaching, you know, and so on and so forth. And then I can click into, say, Push4life, and now I'm within that list, and all I see is that. And you can just keep going deeper and deeper, but then you can zoom out. But it's all within the same list.
I like that.
And so the way I work it is I have like a Scrum folder, and then I have my sprint lists. And within each sprint, I have a sort of done, in processing, and to do. And then I sort of, I move stuff around as I've been, you know, complete stuff. And I archive it all, so if I need to check on stuff. And it's just this extremely flexible way. And there's an app for it on my iPhone, and I'm sure there's an Android app. So I have all of these lists with me at any given time. And like when I do lectures and stuff, I have all of them. It's all within this app. Like my entire brain is within this app.
Nice.
And it's free. So
that's great, because it's very difficult to do that in Microsoft Word, to make lists and outlines like you're saying, and folding it definitely sounds nice. So
it's brilliant.
I mean, I've got my notebook, old school.
Yeah,
you know, that's what I use, because I can't really find anything digital that I find as effective.
You will definitely love Workflowy.
And this is the only organization of this is chronology.
Yeah.
You know, I keep a couple for like different like aspects of my life, but it's just a chronological list of ideas, thoughts, you know,
that's
whatever.
great. I mean, I have Moleskins as well. It's like I have multiple sort of ways of doing things that, you know, depending on what I'm doing, I like, you know, pen and paper.
Yeah.
If I need to get away from technology and just use my brain, I love doing that too. And I like having lots of different colored pens and that kind of thing, like just to be creative. But once I've done it that way, a lot of times I will put it into the digital format, because then it's flexible. I can copy and paste stuff. I can access it via my iPhone. I can access it at I can actually access it from any computer, because it's an online app. It's a browser web app. You know what I mean? So
nice.
Which is really cool.
I've just gotten into using, and this is not like new technology, but like just Google Docs, and just for like a lot of the teaching I do, and it really has helped quite a bit.
Oh yeah.
No more carrying around those little flash drives and this computer, that computer, but that has sped things up a lot for me, and I know there's definitely a much smoother way for me to run my operation, and I like that a lot. I'll definitely check that out. That's Workflowing.
Workflowy. So it's
Flowy.
Workflow with a Y at the end.
Oh, okay. I thought you said Workflowing, which is also kind of a cool name too.
Yeah.
I'm workflowing right now. Yeah, okay. Thank you for that tip. I'll put that in the show notes too. Yeah, I think like, and you know, another thing, like if I bring it back to the January thing, by doing something every single day, you're forced to do it, you start to realize like, man, I did this yesterday. Like I set this up yesterday. I set this up yesterday. I moved this here yesterday. Right. And you start to say like, all right, well, I'm wasting a lot of time. And this is like, I guess like, it's like physical context switching, where you're moving things around or you're plugging things in, and you realize, okay, like if I'm going to spend 10 minutes every time I make music doing this, and I think my time is so precious, you know, that's a lot of time if you can buy that back with some better workflow.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of times, I at least for me, that kind of physical context switching where I know I have to sort of switch, cables around, and I hate that.
Yep.
Like that might actually put me off doing anything. You know what I mean? Like,
I have a lot of gear I don't use because I don't feel like hooking it up.
Yeah. And also just sort of getting your head into it because you haven't used it in so long and it's not part of your process.
Why does this thing go? Well, it's nothing worse than when you're like excited to do something and then like you hook something up and it's not working and you don't know why. And it's, it could be, it might even just be a bad
Talk
wire.
about a flow killer.
Oh yeah. It's the worst. Well, your inspiration and motivation is so fragile. Like it doesn't take much to shatter it. But another like kind of bonus lesson out of the daily jam is that I've also learned you can really manufacture it by just forcing yourself to get to work. And like pretty much every single time, like even there were a lot of times I didn't want to do it. And I was debating, maybe I'll just miss today. It's not a big deal. But once you get going, there's usually something that comes up along the way that gets you excited again. And then actually, you're there.
Yeah, one thing I love to do is I love to read books about authors' writing processes. Just like there's a lot of books out there.
One of my favorite books, The War of Art.
Oh, yeah.
Stephen Pressfield.
That's a great one. And a lot of times they'll also just say, just do it, just write, and... don't wait for inspiration. Like that's what really separates professionals from amateurs, is that amateurs say, I'm not inspired. Right. Whereas a professional will just sit down and do it. And like you say, then that's when the muse shows up, like Stephen Pressfield says in the War of Art is it's almost like by showing your dedication to the process, that's almost like your offering to the muse, and that's when the muse will show up. You know what I mean? And if you're not prepared to dedicate your time and efforts just to sort of get going, don't expect the muse to show up. You know what I mean?
Right.
And like you said, it's almost like going to the gym. I think
exactly.
The hardest part is going to the gym, but once you get there and like say you've just done sort of like 5 minutes on a treadmill or something, it's actually fun. And that's kind of like the muse showing up. It's like once you sit, like anytime I sit down to write music or like I sit down on my push, the initial like 10 minutes of just sort of like getting going, I always think, why do I even do this? It's like I'm terrible. But then all of a sudden, like you say, all of a sudden something will happen and it'll be like, oh, and it moves you. You know what I mean? And it's and that's the spark. And all of a sudden 2 hours have passed and I have like a half finished track that I'm like, wow, where did that come from? And it's always at the end of it that you just realize, oh, I was in this sort of zone.
Yeah.
I never realize it when I'm in it. You know what I mean? It's like
you can't because then you come out of it.
Exactly. It's like a dream state as well. Yeah. When you wake up in the morning and you try to remember your dream, that's going to make it go away even faster,
Right. Yeah, I'll post the link to the article. I forget exactly where it came from. Some website on like productivity. As soon as I hear it, I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, that it's kind of well-known person.
Yeah.
But he had this thing called micro goals, which had to do with the gym, and his whole goal was that he would walk past the gym on his way to work. So his goal was, I'm going to just swipe my card at the gym like I'm going to the gym. That's all I have to do.
Right.
So I just have to go in. And then I could go home. That's all. And what he found was that, once you do that, you're like, all right, well, I'm here. I'll do maybe 5 minutes. I might as well get changed. I'll do 5 minutes. All right. So I do 5 minutes. And then it's like, well, I'm not going to stop after 5 minutes. I'm already changed.
Yeah.
So I've used that to trick myself often. All right, I'm just going to do this for like 10 minutes. And, 10 minutes is kind of what it takes just to get into any activity. And next thing you know, you're in the zone and you're going. And I find like probably 9 times out of 10, I say, all right, I'm just going to keep going,
Yeah, and it actually becomes fun. It's fun. I actually have the same thing with drumming. Like I'm one of those musicians, I hate practicing. I really don't like practicing. I like playing my instrument.
Right.
Like I'll put music on that I like, that I enjoy playing to. But when you talk about actual practice, the difference is you're doing stuff that you're not good at. which where you realize how much you suck. You know what I mean? That's for me. That's what real practice is.
Yeah,
And
it's hard.
I've never enjoyed practicing that much, unless it's something I really, really want to learn. But just sort of like getting better at my instrument and just putting in the time. But so I'll also do the same thing where I'll just be like, I'm just going to do this 5 minute. I have like this warm up exercise, and let me just do that. You know, and there's no way I'm going to stop once I've warmed up. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah. Well, I'm going to kind of segue this into something I want to talk to you about anyway.
Sure.
I've found that a kind of cool, and it kind of combines the micro goals and getting the actual practice in, which is, you know, like you said, it's not just playing your instrument for fun or writing a song. It's the like, you know, working on the scale or maybe like paradiddles or, you know, whatever it is, that stuff. Is I found melodics to be a very useful tool for that.
Yeah,
and
melodics is amazing.
It kind of combines the, you know, just 5 minutes a day. Like that's not much, you know, that's less time than it takes to eat a sandwich. Like you can find 5 minutes. And you've got yourself at least one kind of full course on there.
Yeah.
So tell us about that, because that was a cool thing, because I was kind of in the middle of using melodics quite a bit, and then, you know, you came along. I was like, oh, look at that, you know.
Yeah. Well, it was funny. I think the way it happened, I believe at least, because I was kind of sort of following the line of what happened is about let me see, what is this? About just over a year ago, I'd say, hold on, 2018. So it was maybe like September, October of 2016. I was really sort of getting into Instagram, and I was trying to post just some, like your January thing. I was kind of trying to do that. I would do like an Ableton Push improvisation, and it wasn't a track. It was I would literally set up my my iPhone. I would load up some sound on my Push, and I just play around until I kind of got into the zone, like we were talking about, like maybe 10, 15 minutes just messing about. And once I felt like I had something, I would hit record and then just do whatever came into my mind whilst I was sort of in the moment of inspiration. And it was, you know, it's a 1 minute video, because you can, at least then you can do more than 60 seconds on video on Instagram. So I was doing this every day, and then I came across a sound by Sonic Couture, which is their hang drum sample library. You know, they sampled a hang drum, and it sounds beautiful. And I ended up doing a lot of sort of these Instagram videos using the hang drum sounds. And one day, Houston Singletary, the sort of one of the leading Ableton Push Ableton people in general, he posted a video of him playing, I think it was a hang drum sound that he had. And in the description, he mentioned that it was inspired by Push4life or something like that, using the hang drum sound. And then I saw Melodics commented on his video, because I saw it because I was mentioned in his video, and I went to it, and I saw Melodics being like, oh, cool, thanks, Houston, or something like that. And then maybe like a week later, I got an email from Melodics just being like, you know, hey, you know, we're Melodics. Would you like to sort of try out our software? And, you know, just sort of like it was Sam, the CEO, introducing himself, and you know, just seeing if I'd like to try it out. And I did, and I really, really loved it. And funnily enough, they're based in New Zealand, and I think 2 months after that, I was going to New Zealand anyway, visiting a friend. And I was like, oh, let me just come by and visit whilst I'm in town. And I did that, and I met the Melodics team. And Sam was like, you know, maybe you can do like some sort of course, because I was doing a finger drumming course at the time for beginners, and I think Sam really liked that. It was an Ableton Push course, and by that time I was sort of like hooked on Melodics. Sorry, and so we came up with this idea of I have this for my drum students. I have like a beginner's course, I guess you could call it. And I said, let me just translate that to Melodics, and I'll record videos, because I was like, you know, the one thing I feel like that is missing is video content, because a lot of people who are getting into the melodics thing, you know, they don't know how to finger drum, and there are fundamentals you have to understand about drumming. You know, like the hi-hat sort of plays continuously while you're doing the bass drum and the snare drum, and how you kind of learn that independence. There's a bit of a method to it. And, you know, so, and that's actually what Sam had said, the CEO of Melodics, was that a lot of people were having issues going from sort of one hand at the time finger drumming to playing multiple things at a given time. So they could see in their analytics that was a big drop off where people just didn't know how to do it. So I was like, well, okay, let me make a course specific to help people bridge that gap from one finger at a time drumming to multiple things going on at a given time. And so we decided on what it was that we should do. And then over the course of last year, there was some sort of, you know, like scheduling issues. They had stuff coming out and I think updates. And so it actually ended up taking the better part of like 9 months to get it done so they could release it. And it came out in, I think, September of last year. And from what Sam has told me, people are enjoying it and finding it helpful. And I've had a few emails from people saying they enjoy it. So it's been really cool for me because I, again, was a fan of melodics. You know, once I started using it, I was like, this is amazing. Like, I had wished I had something like that, especially when it comes to finger drumming and drumming in general. One of the most important things, one of the most important skills to have is timing. And, you know, playing along to a metronome will only get you so far, you know, because I always compare playing to a metronome like having safety wheels when you learn to ride a bike. Yeah. You know, like anytime you sort of lean ahead of the beat or behind the beat, the metronome is going to correct you. So what I try to teach my students, the more advanced students, is a lot of people think if I can play to a metronome, I've got good timing. And that's actually a fallacy. It's not quite true, because if you do end up speeding up or slowing down, the metronome corrects you almost instantaneously. You'll be like, whoa, I need to slow down, or I need to speed up, I'm dragging. So what I actually ended up used to do before something like Melodics came along, which is also available now for actual drummers on electronic drum kits, which was really cool, is I used to program my own metronome clicks in Ableton, where I do like a 4-bar loop, and I'd have quarter notes in the first bar, and then I'd have a click on beat 1 and beat 3 in the second bar, and I'd only have beat 1 of the third bar, and then nothing throughout the fourth bar. So you'd have 2 complete bars where there was no click. So you'd have the first bar going 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 2, 2, 1. You know what I mean? So there's this huge gap, and that's what I mean. And that's when you realize if your timing is actually good or not, especially if you do that at a slow tempo. Oh, yeah. Like I'd usually do it at about 60 BPM. And then I'd just play. I tried to solo around that metronome that I'd custom built, and that really made my timing good, because you'd have this long gap where there was nothing, and you'd really be getting into it and be like, yeah, and you'd hit the crash on the one, and like a second later the click would come in, and you'd be like, whoa, my timing isn't as good as I thought it would be.
I know that feeling well.
So that's one of the reasons I used to love Ableton, was I used to build these custom practice clicks for my drumming. You know, like even I'd cut up loops from tracks that I loved, like specific parts that I really enjoyed soloing around, and I just loop like these 4 bars and create these like 20-minute versions and export them and put them on my MP3 player at the time, and that's what I'd practice to. So. Yeah.
Nice. That'll definitely shine the light on the truth, you know? I mean,
yep. And as a drummer, you need that. You really do need that. There's no point in having an illusion of good timing.
Yeah. I mean, that is really the most important part, right? I mean, like that's what you're doing more than anything. If you don't have that,
and it's especially these days, like for instance, when I played with Cirque du Soleil, the entire show's to a click track. You know what I mean? So, which is it's okay, because like I said, the click is constantly correcting you, but you don't want to be corrected by the click. And you don't want the click to make your timing good. Your timing has to be good regardless of the click being there. So yeah, as a modern day musician, especially a drummer, most of the time if you're on stage, unless you're in just like a traditional rock outfit, you're going to be playing with sequencers and, you know, maybe someone's looping stuff on stage. So your timing has to be pretty immaculate.
Yeah. Yeah, and there is, I play a little bit of drums. I wouldn't really call myself a drummer, but, you know, I play a little bit. And even with the click, you know, like you can very easily just fall out of that time. And although the click does correct you, if you listen back to your performance, especially without the click, you feel that like drag and that pull.
Absolutely.
And like you're kind of waiting to hit the next beat instead of it's just a nice
It's
flow.
just there. Yeah.
So it's pretty eye-opening. And I mean, I can only imagine, I like having the click really fast, you know, so when you have your 2 bars with no click, I mean, that's going to really
like I said,
expose you.
especially if you do that exercise at a slow tempo.
Yeah, oh yeah.
And play double time. So it's actually then it ends up being 4 bars. You know, if your click's at 60 BPM and you're basically playing double time at 120 BPM of what you're playing, that 2 bars is actually 4 bars.
Yeah, that's brutal.
Yeah, but it's amazing
I know,
training. Like
that's not gonna happen for me. Hey, that's good. That's what you're talking about though with practice. I mean, that's the hard work part.
Yeah, that's really actually I think why I you know, like I love Ableton, that kind of thing, because what I ended up doing was I ended up devising, because I hate practicing. And as a session drummer, you know, you have to be prepared, you know, or as a session musician in general, you have to be prepared for almost any type of gig. You know what I mean? A hip hop gig, genres, a rock gig, a Latin gig. And so what I ended up doing was I devised exercises that let me just practice the most efficient way possible. So in a 30-minute practice session, I could basically cover all bases I needed to cover to always be in shape. You know what I mean? So there are ways of kind of getting around having to practice for multiple hours per day. You just have to work out how to be efficient. So one thing that I would do is as a drummer, I realized even though there are all kinds of subdivisions, the only subdivisions I really needed to master were quarter notes, eighth notes, triplets, 16th notes, and sextuplets. So that's 5 subdivisions. So I would make these practice exercises where, you know, with that click that I was telling you about, you know, with the big gap, where I'd be practicing, I just practice quarter notes for like 5 minutes. Then I'd practice eighth notes, and then like I said, triplets, 16ths, and sextuplets. Make sure I had them all just really solid, because at the end of the day, you know, if I'm playing funk, I'm, you know, mainly playing eighth notes and 16th notes with syncopations, but they are only eighth notes and 16th notes, maybe a few triplets. If I'm playing straight rock, it's usually eighth notes and 16th notes, you know, so that's the sort of the bread and butter of subdivisions that you need to be able to do. And then the other main thing you have to be able to do as a musician in general, actually, not even just as a drummer, is you need to be able to switch between subdivisions, because, you know, it's all well and good being able to play eighth notes and to be able to play triplets, but it's hard to switch between eighth notes and triplets because, you know, it's binary and ternary or whatever they call it, you know, so going from bam 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 ba 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 bam bam, you know what I mean? It feels really weird. It doesn't feel natural, and it's something you really have to train yourself to do. So you not only have to really master the individual subdivisions, you also have to master every combination. You know, so I'd go from quarter note to eighth note, quarter note to triplet, quarter note to 16th, quarter note to sextuplet. That's all of the quarter note variations. Then eighth note to triplet, eighth note, and so on until you end up with 16th note to sextuplet. And then you've covered every combination. And then the other thing that I would practice is accents on 16th notes, where you play an accent on the first 16th note, second, then third, and then fourth. And then the first and second, first and third. You know what I mean? So you go through all combinations until you reach all 4 16th notes. And if you could do that, and then the subdivisions, you're pretty good to go. You know what I mean? So if I practice that a couple of times a week, I was always in shape. You know what I mean? So that's what I mean by practice. But what I would do is I would play to albums a lot. You know, just the music I enjoy playing to. It's not like I wouldn't do that. But actual practice and to make sure I was really in shape, you know, my timing and all of that. That's all I really did. And that's all I still do if I ever practice.
Hey, that sounds really clever, honestly, because like you said, those are kind of the, maybe it's like a little bit of an 80-20 kind of thing where it's most of
exactly.
what you're doing.
It is actually. It's the Pareto's law.
Yeah. And to be able to switch between them also is key. You know, and then when you start getting those different accents, I mean, that sounds like it covers most of the important bases, and those are a lot of the places where in my own little drumming where the problems happen. We're trying to
it's actually that is where the problems happen with most people, because a lot of people can hold down a beat as a drummer. You know what I mean? Like if you're just sort of playing boom, ba, boom, dum, da, dum, dum, and you're just holding that beat, it's easy because it's very consistent. There's no real changes. And then a lot of times when you hear someone where you realize they're an amateur, I'll just say, is when a fill-in happens, because that's actually where the subdivisions change.
Right.
You know, so you're going boom, da, dum, dum, da, dum, ba, ba, da, ga, da, bum, ba, da, da, dun, da, da, boom. You know what I mean? Where you're kind of doing that kind of thing, and all of a sudden you're like, whoa, where's the time gone? Because they can't do that. That's like this that skill they haven't really developed. And that's where you really sort of separate the men from the boys, so to speak, is that's where you realize if someone's put in the time, like where they can just sort of go out of the flow, be able to do a fill-in, and not, you know, most people will speed up because you get nervous as well. You're like, I want to do this right, and all of a sudden it's like, whoa, you know what I'm saying?
And
so
that click is late.
Yeah, exactly.
The click was late.
Yeah, it wasn't me. Like, it's so funny because sometimes I have students and they're like, you know, I'll have like a click like that on, and they're like, they're convinced that my computer is wrong.
Must have had like some kind of like hard disk spike or something, because
yeah.
Oh, you're so right. I mean, like you get the excitement of like the change coming, and like
exactly, and then you get like this spike in adrenaline in your blood, which makes you, you know, and that's the really cool thing about if you practice to those clicks where there are large spaces, and then you, like, what I would do is I would do those warm-up exercises, like I said, with the individual subdivisions, combined subdivisions, and if I was really feeling good, I'd do the accent one, you know, with maybe like with paradiddles or whatever. And then what I'd do is I would just solo. And the thing is, when you're soloing, you know, I'd say at least the first few minutes, you know, you're always off with the click. And then you kind of get into this zone, in a way it's a flow state, because you're not thinking anymore. It's kind of just happening, and you're in sync with the click. But also, you know, like you'll be getting into the solo, and there'll be parts in the solo where, you know, when you sort of push yourself, and this isn't just a drumming thing, it's with any instrument. When you push yourself to your limit, you know, you're like, whoa, I don't actually know if I'm physically capable of doing what I'm trying to do right now, but you've started, so you have to see it through. So then you get that spike in adrenaline, and it's almost like you're training your mind not to get too excited, or you're staying objective. And that's why that click is so important, because when you're on stage, you know, especially if you're doing music where improvisation is involved, and you're riffing off of other musicians in the moment, and you're maybe soloing and they're soloing, and you're going with their solo if you're doing some kind of jazz music or something. You know, there's a lot of adrenaline involved.
Sure.
And you really have to train yourself to sort of be able to stay calm within the chaos. And that's why it's so important to play the clicks like that. And I can't actually emphasize it enough. And also for all musicians, not just for drummers. You know what I mean? Because like if you're a guitarist or a keyboardist, inevitably at one point in the show, you'll be playing on your own. So you can't rely on the drummer.
Yeah. And I've got lots of recordings where you can clearly hear the excitement happen. And like half the time, the song already starts off about twice as fast as it's supposed to, because you're excited.
Yeah, it's so true. It's amazing. That's really amazing, actually. There's so many times with bands that I've worked with, when you listen back to a live recording, you almost can't believe that you play like I would be like
Yeah.
something's wrong with the recording.
Right.
There's no way I'd play it
Is the
that fast.
sample rate correct? Like what's
Yeah.
going on?
Yeah, it's so true because adrenaline does something to your time feel as well. Like I
Yeah.
guess your perceptions speed up, which means everything speeds up, and you think you're playing slow, but you're actually playing really fast.
Right. Yeah, and I notice when I do play with a metronome, or sometimes it's not an actual metronome, it might actually just be a programmed beat, something that's like, not
Fun to
listening
play
to
to.
me at all. It's just
Yeah.
carrying on straight ahead no matter what I do. You start to like, as you start learning a new riff or whatever it is, something that might be challenging, once you start getting it, you start to feel the space between the notes almost growing.
Yeah.
And you feel like, you know what, like I felt like I had to really rush to get through this, but now that I've kind of got the physical part down, there's actually a lot of empty space, and you get a sense for that.
Which is really, really important, actually. That empty space is super important.
Yeah. Yeah, it's almost like some kind of like meditative thing where, you're just kind of letting the time be it's steady thing that it always is. And that's always such a weird thing about time, is that our perception of it varies so much, yet it's so constant.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I always love that point when I'm able to get that like new part that's a little challenging, and then I start to see like, you know what, there's actually a lot more space in between these different notes than I originally thought. I had to rush through them, and
yeah. That's actually to go back to the session drummer thing. One of the key takeaways that I'll share as a session musician is the way it would usually work, and this just relates to what you just said, is, you might get like back then it was a tape or a CD, and now it'll be an MP3 of maybe like a set that you have to learn. Like maybe someone's going to go on the road and their drummer broke their arm, and you get like a call, and can you do this next week? And we don't have any time to rehearse. Here's the 90-minute show. We don't have anything other than this MP3. Can you learn it? And all of a sudden you're just like listening to this thing over and over again, and you're writing down all your notes, and you're trying to stick to whatever it is they've given you as, precisely as possible. And then you play the show, and it just, everything just seems so full of all of these things that you have to remember. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And like, say for instance, you're on a tour that's maybe, let it be like something like 4 weeks or something. Once you get that initial week over where that adrenaline kind of dies down, that's also, and you kind of get into the rhythm of, the way the music works, the way the band works, the way the music works. That's when you start to sort of breathe into it, and then you notice those spaces, and you relax into the music. And the more you relax, the more space there is, because like at the beginning, everything's so tense as a session musician because you're just trying to get it right. And usually you don't know these people at all. They've just booked you, and they've heard that you're good, and you meet them almost like when you're going on stage for the first time, if you're unlucky. But so there's just so much tension, and the more you kind of relax into the music, the more space there is, and that's when I found there was more room where I could sort of start inserting myself, because you would see the spaces where there's enough space for you to do something your way. Mm-hmm. But if you don't feel that space, if all you perceive are the notes that you're playing without perceiving the spaces, then there's no room for you to do anything, because you have to hit those notes. It's almost like I was saying with the Blue Man Show, you can go from A to B to C, but the spaces, that's also a thing with the space in between. You have that freedom to improvise. You still have to get from A to B to C to D. So there is a very specific way of going there, but there's room to maneuver it the way you want, and to sort of push and pull the time, possibly. You know what I mean? To sort of like make it feel like it's speeding up or slowing down, to sort of to emphasize you're going into the chorus, or you know what I mean, or crescendo the volume, or go down. And there's not much room for that at the beginning when all you're focusing on is the notes and not the spaces. So it's very true what you just said with the spaces. Very important.
Yeah, I think it was Miles Davis that mentioned the space between the notes. I think he said the most important notes are the ones I don't play.
Yeah.
Which I always love that. And it just makes me think to a lot of like I think like with drummers especially, I don't know if it's like a boredom thing when you get tired of just holding down the beat and you want to just be like, oh, I got like 6 other drums here. Let's work these into the song a little. But it is hard to find someone willing to just play and let it have space. And something I'm finding a lot, you know, over the years as I've gone into a little more like electronic flavor to my music, where there's all these like noises and sounds you can add in, even if it's like a kind of rock song. It's like, I could make a cool synth white noise or whatever you want to bring in. To let the music breathe is just it's a like kind of almost like a maturity thing, I think, where you allow your part to have space, because I think for me is if I'm playing every instrument, I'm like, all right, well, I got to be doing something the whole time. You know? But to just kind of give it a break and let it breathe so something else can come up and live.
I think it's a confidence thing, being confident in what it is you're trying to say, because I think the less confident you are, the more you try to pack in, because you're like, oh, this just isn't enough. You know what I mean? Like if you know, if you like if you listen to sort of people who do really minimal music, that, you know, a lot of people might think that's easy to do because there's so little there. But I think that's some of the hardest music to do, because they've literally scraped away everything that isn't necessary to get the idea across. So it's as lean as it can be. It's very specific, and that's super, super hard. And I think that comes with it, like you said, with maturity and confidence, is that you're like, this is what I want to say, and I don't need to make it better or worse in any way. It is what it is. And, you know, I find that even with I don't know how you feel about this, but with my podcast, like, it's really weird for me to sort of like, you know, decide what it is I'm trying to say, you know, like if I'm doing an intro to a show or something, and I'm trying to tell a story, like, what's the actual bit of the story that I want to say? And because I'll try to elaborate like all of this crazy stuff around it, because I'll be like, this is so boring, because it's my story. It's boring to me. But if I know what it is I'm trying to say, and I'm just confidently, this is my story, and I just put it out there, you know, it'll be like 1 minute long, and I get every idea across that I want. I don't need to make it 10 minutes and fill it just to make it the quantity. It's, you know, it's all about the quality. And so
I have a few parallels to that. When I first started doing a live electronic set, where I'm taking my songs, I'm performing them using Ableton Live and my MIDI controllers, I had a control for everything. You know, I could do anything. I had all these knobs and faders and everything. And I felt that I had to always be moving something. Always. When I'm playing a note, I'm singing, I'm turning a knob, I'm affecting something. And it just kind of, after a while, I started to realize, like, I'm just doing things because maybe it's a confidence thing, or it's just, I feel like I have to be, I have this like kind of like fear of coming off like I'm just pressing play, you know? And it's just like a karaoke set. But laying back on that was so huge. And even like with writing too, the podcast is a good example too. But writing, sometimes like you gotta really like get it across with less, make it short, and that's hard. And I'll often show my students a quote attributed to Abraham Lincoln. I don't know if it really is. I should probably get that right. I tell them it is. But where it's like, he wrote a letter apparently, and it was like, I'm sorry I wrote such a long letter. I didn't have the time to write a short one.
Oh yeah, I know that quote. That's a great quote.
Yeah, and it ties in with the minimalist music, and the minimalist stuff like really does fascinate me, because I like scratch my head. I'm like, how are they making this interesting with so few elements? And I'm coming to learn that the more things you throw on a track, the less you get to hear any one of those things. You don't get to hear the textures. You don't get to hear the way it fades out or the reverb dies away, because something else is coming and getting in the way. And to be kind of like okay and accept those sounds for what they are and let them live is a hard thing to do when you're sitting behind all these controls and you got all these presets over here and you got all these knobs and, oh, I got a million effects I can throw in. it's hard to like practice that restraint and like sort of just let the sound be.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I feel you on that like comment that like in some ways like minimalist music is some of the hardest stuff to do.
Yeah.
Because
one of my favorite artists is Ryuichi Sakamoto. Do you know him?
Nope.
Oh man.
Good.
It's
glad to hear it's something new.
Oh yeah, I mean he is amazing. He's one of the soundtracks that he did. He's done a few soundtracks, but one of my favorite ones that I actually a lot of the courses that I've written, I'll put it on in the background. It's kind of pretty dark, but it's The Revenant. Have you know the movie with Leonardo DiCaprio? He did the soundtrack to that. And
that was a dark movie too, huh?
Yeah, and it's a dark soundtrack actually, but it's beautiful at the same time. Yeah. And he had actually he had cancer just before he did that movie. I think he was struggling with it for like 12 months or even longer, and he just sort of recovered, and then he wrote that soundtrack. So it really is pretty intense. But that's another one where it's extremely minimal, and he uses a lot of textures and stuff. But it's like you said, it's like there's so little going on at the end of the day, but it just grabs you. It's because it's perfect. You know what I mean? He did exactly what he wanted to do, and there's nothing more or less. It's what it should be. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
He didn't try to make it any more interesting because he felt like there needs to be a beat or some taiko drums or whatever. You know what I mean? It's just lots of weird chords and stuff on strings, but it's beautiful. And another artist that I really like, who's very minimal and very specific, is a composer called Johan Johansson, and he did the soundtrack to, I don't know if it's The Arrival or Arrival, that movie with the aliens.
I know what you're talking about.
Which is an amazing soundtrack as well. So yeah, that's some music that if people don't know, that's what I'm really into as well.
That's cool. I'm going to investigate more of that. And both of those movies actually were pretty striking in the mood. And of course, the music is a huge factor in that.
Totally.
I've in my last jam for January, I decided to play some like acoustic guitar, go back to the roots kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I recorded just acoustic guitar and vocals onto the OP1 synthesizer. It's got a 4-track recorder in there. And it's so nice because it's so fast. But I found myself starting to decorate the track and add things and effect, reverb, and this. And I realized, like, all right, I know what I've realized I'm hiding my performance behind this. Yeah. I'm hiding it. I'm trying to mask it. I feel weird about it or something.
That's that confidence thing I was saying.
Yeah, exactly. And that was insecurities trying to dress it up. And I think a lot of times when I'm going overboard on the track, it's really just like kind of a, I mean, it's like kind of a challenge to hear your voice dry with no reverb.
Totally.
Or your guitar playing without any without a double to kind of fill in the little misses and Well,
I think at the end of the day, it's the equivalent of being naked because when you present your art to the world, if it's not like a craft where you're like, I'm going to make, a hip hop beat. I mean, that's something that's very specific that everyone knows. It's a format. But as soon as you start creating art where you're expressing something that comes from deep within you, if you literally just put it out there the way you feel it's supposed to be, you're being naked. And I think, you have every right to feel weird about it because, people online can really troll you and be like, what's this? This is what a bunch of rubbish or whatever. And it's almost like the equivalent of people staring at you and pointing at your naked body and being like, what's that? And it'd be like the most embarrassing, shameful thing. And that's another thing I can relate to a lot is like the music. When I create music from deep within my soul, let's put it that way, like the music that reflects who I am as a human being, it doesn't fit into any modern day format in terms of what people consider popular music. It's very abstract. A lot of time it's arrhythmic, so there's no pulse to it. It's sort of like it almost breathes, it'll get faster and slower in weird ways, like uncomfortable ways. A lot of times the harmonic textures that are happening are dissonant. You know what I mean? So, and I have a lot of issues putting that stuff out there on the web because I'm like, sometimes I'm like this. I can't even imagine anyone wanting to listen to it because it's so raw, and like it's almost like I don't want people to think like who does this person think he is to even put that out there? And I think when you get to that point, that's when you really know you've found your own voice. You know what I mean? Because it's so real, and if it's come out like in a sort of flow state, you know, where you haven't actually tried to manipulate it, it's like a really true expression of an emotion you felt. You know, that really is your voice, and I think that's a really scary thing as an artist, to actually present something to the world and say, this is who I am, and it's not normal, it's not the norm. It doesn't fit into the box that you want it to fit into. You know what I mean? And that's very scary. And, you know, I myself still to this day have issues doing that. It's something that I mentioned this in my own podcast. One of the things that I'm trying to document in this podcast that I've just started is my process of finding that inner voice again, because I feel like when you start off with music, if you start off at a relatively young age, or even if you start off when you're like a teenager or an early adult, if you start off from a place of fun where you're just enjoying the music and the music is really moving you, you know, it's all authentic, right? Because you have no reason to, because usually you're doing it on your own, so you're not trying to, you know, please anyone. But as soon as it starts becoming something that's presented in a public forum, there's an audience there, and they might clap at certain points, and you might not get any response at something that you like, and it kind of shapes your art. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And if you're not careful, you end up just wanting to create stuff to please an audience, and that no longer has anything to do with your own artistic expression. And I've gone through this personally, where when I started making music, I came from a very pure place. And then sort of like in my 20s and 30s, it became more about, you know, work and how can I make a living off of this? You know, okay, so I'd be programming beats that were in formats like hip hop, electronic, and rock. And it was all about stuff that had already been made. And I just was like, how can I make money producing music and maybe writing for other artists? And I found it really, it kind of killed any kind of artistic expression that I had, because I was only trying to work towards what other people might want. Which was awful, because no one would want it then, you know what I mean? Because it was just so diluted. There was no purpose to it. And now finally, you know, like, especially since I've discovered modular, where normal rules don't apply anyway, you know what I mean? Like with modular, because, you know, you might have a parameter that you turn a knob where it changes everything in such weird alien ways that everything's sort of interesting, because there's no format anymore. You know what I'm saying? So since I've sort of started working with modular, I've really started to find stuff that I feel like is coming from a deep place within myself again. You know what I mean? And I think it's really important when you create art, even if you don't ever share it with anyone, the process of making art that comes from a pure place, for me at least, is something that's very healing. And there's something that the process in itself is its own reward. And if, you know, you find people who might enjoy listening to it, that's almost like secondary. And but you don't really get that if you're producing music for other people's tastes. The reward will be if that person likes it. If the audience claps, that then is the reward. But the process in itself is almost like a terrible process, because you're like, will they like this? Will they not like this? You're concerned with stuff that has nothing to do with the music. Whereas if you create music from a really pure place and you're in this deep flow state, all of a sudden a couple of hours have passed, you have this music, like I'm sure it happened to you multiple times in this January, where you're like, oh my God, I love this. And it's something that you will love listening to yourself, because it came from such a pure place. And whilst you were making it, I'm sure the last thing you were thinking about is, will anyone like this? It was the process that was important. And then anything after that is a bonus, you know? And I think as a musician, it's very important to do that.
Well, that's kind of what January strips away, is any concern over whether anyone's going to like it, because it is just about doing the process.
Yeah.
And you're right. I mean, I'm really like excited about some of the things that have come up. Not everything's great. Some of it will just kind of die its own death and has lived its life as long as it will go. But well, it's like it's very easy to get caught up in like what people are gonna think, and it's easy to say, well, if my thing sounds like some other professionally done thing or something that's been done before that's successful, then people will think this is good too. But it like you said, there goes all the artistic expression. It's all out the window. I find a funny irony in something you said as a session drummer, arrhythmic and lacking like the format, and that's like something like the drums bring is like the rhythm and the format and the structure to the song, and it's pretty cool that you're getting into this like world where that's not existent.
Yeah, well, actually, when I play drums, the way I like to play drums, it is actually arrhythmic. Funnily enough, it's like and that's like I always feel like there's two parts of what I do as a musician. There's the craftsman, which is the session musician, which is the person who can get a call and someone sends me music and I can replicate what they want me to replicate. And that's the craftsman. But then there's the artistic side of me that, like what we were just talking about, has there's so much artistic expression that's just purely in me that wants to release itself through me. And when I sit down on the drums and I just play without that click that I was telling you about, that's the sort of craftsman in me that wants my craft to be good.
Right.
But then there's this other side of me when I sit down and I get into this really sort of trance state where I'll be, I'm not even there anymore. And it's a very, the rhythm actually is very flowing. It's sort of like there's no pulse to it anymore. And that is actually my normal state of expression. Like that's how I make music, is arrhythmic, which is weird as a drummer, I know, but
yeah, it's cool. Well, it's cool that and it gives you those kind of like, and this is like the weird thing about music. It keeps like occurring to me how technical it is on one point. How much like structure and practice and like getting things right and being on time and tune and whatever, all these like technical aspects, the actual physical ability to play. Yet so much of like what makes it interesting and nice is when that stuff's not really there anymore, where it's kind of just feeling it and going with the flow. And it's a weird balance that we have to do. Where we have to,
absolutely.
Like, figure out that like you have to be able to play and control your instruments, but you
also
it's
kind of like you have to learn the rules to break them. That kind of idea, that a lot of people in art tell you, like you really have to understand, what has come before you. Like one person that always comes to mind when I think of like the way I make music, and I don't want to compare myself to this person. It's just I can relate. Is Picasso. Like I remember, like the first pictures I ever saw of Picasso were the things that were famous. He was famous for the weird looking faces and that kind of. I forget the name of the style of painting that he did. I don't know if you know it, but and I remember thinking, God, that guy can't paint at all. I never got it. I mean, I was like 12 or something the first time I saw Picasso paintings, and then when I was a little older, I actually saw a book of his, and the first chapter was like early drawings that he did. Or paintings, and they were these amazing, immaculate paintings, like technically brilliant, like literally portraits of people or landscapes that were like really just beautiful. Like you totally could see what he was painting. It looked like a photograph to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. So he understood the rules. He learned what it was to be a great technical painter, and then he broke them all, and then he found his expression. And I think that's something as a musician, I don't know if everyone should do it, but I think it's good to be able, like whatever instrument you learn, like if you're a guitarist or a keyboardist, or if you learn Ableton Push or whatever instrument you learn, I think it's really good to understand as much of what came before you as possible, just so you know, like even what you might not want to do. And, and just to see what other people have done so you can go other ways, you know what I mean? But if you don't do any of that, excuse me, my throat. If you don't learn any of what came before you, I think you're almost stifling yourself, because there's no way you're going to get to where you could get to your full potential if you have to learn everything from scratch. You know what I mean? Like you have to stand on the shoulders of giants, as you know, is one of the terminologies that people sometimes use. Like, so many people have done so much work before that you can just sort of like just eat it up and just suck it all in, and then you can disregard it. But you will keep a lot of the stuff that resonated with you, that you would have had to learn the long way, the way they learned it. Some people might have Picasso, to come up with his particular style of painting, who knows, maybe he needed 15 years of doing certain things to then break that rule. And you can learn it instantly and find out what is it that makes that particular style of painting what it is. And you can learn that, maybe like if you're into painting, you might learn that in a week, what took him 15 years, and then you can build upon it.
Right.
But if you were to try to get to that point just without ever seeing Picasso, you'd probably never get there. You know what I mean? So, and you can do that with all different kinds of artists and influences. And I think it's really great, like, especially when you're younger, to just suck in everything you can. Because at a certain point, you will find your own voice, but you will, like, as a session musician, for me, like, I remember very well, like, probably like the first 5 years or so of being a musician, I remember almost feeling like I was just copying other musicians. Like, I was really into Dennis Chambers, and I remember Roger Taylor from Queen, and Lars Ulrich, and like, these were drummers I knew inside out, and I would hear myself doing their kind of licks, you know what I mean, and specific characteristics that made them who they were. And I always thought, when am I going to find my voice? But through the process of sort of like sucking up what they had to offer and internalizing it, and then eventually kind of feeling that like it grew old, you know what I mean? Like, at a point, like after 5 years of listening to Lars Ulrich, I was like, I need something new. And then I would disregard it. But there were specific, even if it was just 1%, there was just this crystallization of him that really, really resonated with me, that stuck with me. And if you do that with like 10 or 20 or 100 different people or inspirations, all of these little crystallizations will form into at least the skeleton of what will become your voice. Because when it resonates with you, it's resonating with something that is already within you. You know what I mean? That's what resonance is.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I agree with you totally. And I can see that in my own experience as a musician. The stuff I learned guitar on, Nirvana, the punk rock, early punk rock stuff. And, even if I'm never like a crazy metalhead person or anything, but I did takes from that. And it's interesting when you see that stuff come out in your own work, almost like unintentionally.
Yeah.
And this idea like that it like all kind of crystallizes, and each person gets their own like unique kind of crystallization of various elements is I think because like you when you first start, like a lot of imitation happens, and you realize kind of like what fits and what doesn't. And after a while, like maybe it's there's some people that would argue that like you can't ever do anything that's new. Nothing's new. It's all like old and maybe just recontextualized or something.
Yeah.
But I don't really think that anymore. Like when I was younger, I used to get all bent out of shape. Like if a song sounded like another kind of song I knew, or if it had a similar riff or chord progression. But like that stuff means less and less to me as I go on. It's just part of like the journey and the collection of experiences and the things that I have internalized.
Yeah.
And
I think it also relates back to what you said earlier, where what was it that you said again? That sorry, I forgot what it was. Sorry, just keep going.
Well,
it'll come back to
it
me.
It might be what I was talking about, like learning the cover songs. And how that kind of refreshes the system, where you get like this is like, oh, that's like a kind of melody I never really do. Let's kind of work that in. And now that's getting worked into like all the things that are already there. It's a weird like regurgitation sometimes of just things that have happened, but it starts to become your own regurgitation. Starts to sound kind of gross.
Absolutely. Yeah.
My music is just vomit, but probably a lot of people would agree. But it is like this. To be okay with that, I guess, is nice. Like, to let it be that, and
and also sometimes that might just be a stepping stone that you need to get that out of your system.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and then once that's out, like you say, it's actually a good metaphor, the regurgitation, because it is like sometimes you just need to get it out and then make room for something new. And if you don't get it out, then it'll always start creeping into all of the other stuff you do because you don't want to let it out, because it has to come out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do go through a lot of phases of like, I'm making this kind of music now, and everything's like this, and then all of a sudden, like, a switch gets flipped, and now I'm doing this now, and like, maybe my guitar doesn't come out for a couple months, and then next thing you know, it's the only thing I'm playing. And, it's just, I don't know. That's just how it works sometimes, but that's, I guess then you can kind of zoom out and look at everything that's been done, and there's your body of work kind of. And like, I think the Picasso example is pretty cool, because if you only looked at like the kind of like surreal cubist kind of stuff that he does, you might not realize how much is behind that, and that really came from a very deep, well-informed place. And
exactly.
I think in some ways, I don't know, I'm sure there's people that can tell you for sure, but a lot of his work seems almost like a rebellion against that like kind of formal style, and where everything's like a picture perfect thing, and then that was the excitement of it. Yeah.
He also did this really cool painting that I love, where I think there are like 6 or 8 cows, and he draws one that's really like really detailed and looks like a cow, and then he each subsequent version of it, it gets more and more abstract until it's just the abstraction in the most basic form, and it kind of harkens back to that minimalist thing that we were talking about with the music, where he starts off with this really full and detailed version of the cow, and then afterwards all he has left is basically just this line. You'll probably find the painting online. Maybe you can put it in to the show notes as well, because it's I love that painting, because he just keeps stripping away more and more layers of what you think is necessary, and afterwards it's really just this one line version of a cow. Yeah. But it has everything that is necessary to realize what it is that he painted.
Yeah, I think I'm looking at it now. Yeah, but you're right. Like, it has the essence of the cow still.
He strips away everything until the final essence of, like, if he took one line away from that final part of that picture, it would fall apart and you wouldn't know what it is anymore. You know what I mean? It's like, have you ever heard of Occam's razor?
Yes.
It's like where you make something as simple as possible without oversimplifying it that you don't understand it. It's something along those lines. Yeah, and that painting is actually like a visual representation of Occam's razor, I feel. And that's also something as a teacher, which I'm sure you've gone through yourself. And I try to do this all the time with my my push courses, and I try to target beginners mainly, and because I feel like they kind of get left out. A lot of people with push videos, they try to, show how good they can, do stuff on push. And if you're a beginner, you're like, that's really cool, but I have no idea what that person is doing. And when the sort of way I try to teach in my courses is I try to make everything as simple as it can possibly be. Like literally that a 6-year-old can understand it, but without oversimplifying it to the point where then you don't know how to use the push. It's a very fine line where you sort of like have to be careful. And I think it's almost very fractal in a way, because like these principles, you'll find them in all kinds of things. And it also goes back to that compositional thing where you want to make, like if you have an idea for a composition, a melody or a harmonic structure, you want to simplify it to the point where the pure essence is there. And that's what we were talking about, where you don't want to start filling it up with all this other stuff because the audience then loses the essence of what the melody or the beat or the harmony or the track is about. And I just think that's another really, really cool guiding principle, Occam's razor. That's OCCAMS, Occam's razor, where you always have to try to keep things in their purest form without taking away that final part that makes the whole thing fall apart. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a lot of what I teach with writing. Because, well, yeah, I mean, like, maybe you can remember being in school writing papers and you kind of BSing your way through it or fluffing it up. I got to get to 5 pages. So you just kind of, you say, this is a very, very interesting piece. And like you start saying all these sentences don't actually add anything.
Yeah.
And so much of writing I find is subtracting. And I've kind of brought that to my music a little bit, where I might like work on a part, build it up till it's like maximum thing, and then it's like, all right, well, what can I now remove? Because
so the editing process.
Now it's so complex, I can feel comfortable with it, you know?
Yeah, you feel like you got everything out.
Yeah, like it's intelligent enough now. There's 17 parts. But then like, what can I peel away? And it's amazing how sometimes you find like, you've got all these things going on, but then you just strip it down to the bass and the drums, and you're like, oh man, listen to this. It's got the space, and like I can feel the texture of that bass and hear the way that snare is like fading off into the background, where all that gets lost, you know?
Yeah, it's actually the more you strip away, the more the important things are emphasized at the end of the day.
Yeah, and you can lose the essence real fast by adding more details.
Yeah.
I used to really be into drawing as a kid, and there was a time I wanted to be a comic book artist or a cartoonist or something. I can't tell you how many times I'd be working on a drawing and then do like one last thing. I'm like, crap. I just ruined it, you know? I tried to add this in, and now I hate it.
Yeah. And that happens to me all the time when I try to make a track. It's like you get this you're in this flow state and everything's great, and you do this really cool thing. And it's almost like you kind of end up getting greedy in a way. You're like, I want this sound to be in there, and then you just ruin it. Mm-hmm. And you also ruin that initial inspiration, because then you kind of lose that essence, even in your own mind, of what it is you're trying to do, because you ruin it. You know, you add that extra thing, and then you've kind of lose what was the essence. What do I need to take away? Because in the moment where you're adding stuff, you don't actually know what part, if you add multiple things, ruined it. You know what I mean? Like,
true, yeah.
Because it might have been something that was 3 steps away instead of the last step. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, it's happened to me where I take everything down, and it's the first 2 things I put on the track. That was it. And I just spent all this time. And you get like, your ego gets attached to all the things you added.
So, yeah.
Because you may have worked very hard on it.
Yeah.
It is difficult sometimes. And it's like with writing too. Like you've made these little babies that you've raised and cultivated, and now you have to kill them. You gotta kill your darlings, as they say.
Yeah, that's so true as well.
That's tough. That's why an editor is nice to have sometimes.
Yeah.
A lot of writers hate their editors, though.
I'd love to have an editor, to be honest, like when I'm making courses and stuff, because it's so hard to be objective when you're so deep in the trenches, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's the thing with your music. You never get to hear it for the first time. That's the curse of that's like the band player that never gets to dance, you know. But you never get to hear your track for the first time. You never get that first impression. So it's really difficult to try to listen to your music, you know, objectively, like you said. And sometimes it does help to take a little time off, but still, you know, like all the ingredients in the potion.
Yeah.
So there's another, like, one of those like weird contradictory things. You have to be able to hear it fresh. What does it actually sound like when someone hears it? But you can't. You don't ever, you're not allowed. You've been there the whole time.
The curse.
Yeah. Well, I think that might be a nice place to end. I know we want to do a talk on your podcast, so
absolutely.
Maybe we'll leave a little room for next time.
Definitely.
It's been really awesome talking to you.
Yeah, I really had a great time myself.
A lot of good things to think about, and you know, it's one of the nice things about doing the podcast is I leave here feeling excited to make music. So I thank you for that.
Well, thank you too, and you've made me excited to continue my podcast, like seeing how far you've come as well, and all of the great guests you've had on, and I'm sure it's added so much inspiration to your life, like you've just said. So I can't wait to continue with mine. So
Yeah. Oh, well, the chance to sit down with someone and just talk without the interruptions of everyday life, the phones, the TVs or whatever's going on is really nice. I think everyone should try to make some time in their life to just share conversation. It's very like what is it, like Socrates, I guess, like the Socratic seminar where just talking is like how you do so much of your learning.
Yeah, I think actually that's why podcasts are so popular these days, because that's something that's so lacking, is just long form content, because everything's just like,
in your face.
If something's 5 minutes these days, it's like people are like, there's no way I'm watching that. I don't have the time,
Well, you see
but people long for it, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, everything's so cut up and edited. I mean, you watch like a TV show now and it's every second the frame is changing.
Or a YouTube video. Jesus.
My YouTube attention span's despicable. 2 minutes? What? Come on.
You kidding?
Yeah, I don't got time for that. Well, what's a good place for people to find you? I know we've got your website, but where do you like to send people?
There's basically I have two main websites. For people who are into the Ableton Push and that type of thing, I have push4life.eu, and the 4 is the numeral 4, push4life.eu. And then if anyone's interested in checking out my podcast, that is at musicsoundsandsilence.com. And it's all, full words, musicsoundsandsilence.com.
I like that you included the silence in there. I mean, we kind of talked about that earlier.
Yeah.
But it's kind of nice, like yin and yang, where in order to have like sound, you need the silence, and that's
Absolutely.
what makes it music.
Completely.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you too for inviting me.
Yeah, this has been great. I look forward to some of your next episodes that are coming out. I know you got a bunch of interviews in the works, and I'm excited to do one myself with you. And,
absolutely.
Yeah, so it's been great. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And we'll say our goodbyes then.
All right, take care. Bye-bye.
All right, take care, everybody.